Command & Conquer. It's a series that's been around for basically as long as I've been alive, and over the years it's seen a lot of entries. Most of them have been pretty good. Some have been fantastic, and, well, some are best left not talking about. But you know what someone has never done in the history of mankind? Well, rate them all, from worst to best. So, at great risk to my reputation and personal safety, today I'm going to be doing just that. But before we get into it, I want to give a quick thanks to today's sponsor, Opera GX. Now, Opera here have also been around since 1995, so also just as old as I am, but what is a gaming web browser?
Well, it functions like a normal web browser, but has a ton of useful features built right in that you'll actually use. Thanks to features like the RAM, CPU, and network limiter inside GX Control, and the hot tabs killer, you can free up said resources for gaming. There are other cool things too, like an integrated player to use your existing music subscription service, which pauses automatically when you start watching a video or Twitch stream. And speaking of Twitch, that's built in too, along with Discord, so you can stay in touch and get notified whenever your favourite streamer goes live right from the browser. Customization hasn't been overlooked either. There's a ton of flexibility for how it looks, and it even comes stock with dark themes and has a setting to force dark mode on websites that don't come with it, though in some cases your mileage may vary. Opera GX comes with a ton of useful features that you might already be using via extensions or other plugins. So if you can roll them into one nice little package and save some resources on your PC at the same time, what's not to love? It's free to download, and there's a link in the description if you're interested. And thanks again for Opera GX for sponsoring this video. Starting at the bottom, we have Command & Conquer 4, surprising no one, I'm sure. The last mainline entry in the series to date, CNC4 basically took everything that made previous entries good and chucked them out the window. Base building and established RTS mechanics, gone. Interesting narrative with logical story developments with beloved characters? I don't think so. CNC4 was much maligned since the day it released, and rightly so, with its failure single-handedly suffocating the Command & Conquer name until just recently. At least it had a saving grace. It'd be difficult to make anything worse. If you're interested in hearing me talk about this one in depth, then go watch my full review. It's hard to say anything good about Rivals without being yelled at. Fan reception was intensely negative upon its announcement, and it didn't exactly get any better once it was released. Based on the series' legacy, Rivals is not a good Command & Conquer game, and apart from the recognisable setting, characters and units, also has basically nothing in common with any of its predecessors either. It's a mobile-only game and is stuffed to the brim with microtransactions and pay-to-win mechanics. However, Rivals was never positioned as anything other than a mobile strategy game, and as I discovered in my time playing it while doing my analysis, at times it's actually pretty fun. I know, shoot me. Rivals isn't a good CNC game, and it doesn't live up to the series name that it props itself up with. However, if you're looking for a fun game to play on the go with some familiar units and faces, you could certainly do worse. I'm lumping these two together as I wouldn't really call them expansions, more like content packs. Both came with new missions and units for the Allies and Soviets, with some new music tracks and maps. All welcome additions, but fairly uninspired in hindsight. Most of the development for these was done by a different studio, so it's understandable why it's not all that groundbreaking. The main feature I think was the famous secret ant campaign added with Counter-Strike, where, as the Allies, you are tasked with exterminating a hostile faction of giant, mutated ants. Fun! Perhaps at the time people were more excited for this kind of content, but looking back, it can't hold a candle to expansions that games would receive years later. Covert Ops was the only expansion created for the original Command & Conquer, and while that game was obviously groundbreaking, Covert Ops didn't come close to that game's impact or importance. It did however bring more content than the packs for Red Alert. Covert Ops brought 15 fresh total missions for Nod and GDI, along with new maps and music tracks. Though unfortunately there were not any new units apart from a couple previously reserved just the multiplayer. Of course, Covert Ops also brought along the Jurassic Park mode, which, while not very deep, was a fun addition, and acted as a precursor to the ant levels in Red Alert. While it at least tried different things, Uprising for Red Alert 3 was a little lackluster. It included single-player content only, and as such failed to address the vast number of players who primarily engaged in the game's multiplayer, and even then, the content it did deliver didn't really live up to the standard of the base game. Credit for trying something new to freshen things up though, the unique action-focused campaign for Yuriko was certainly something new to the series. Also, Uprising was standalone, which is something I always love to see. The original Command & Conquer is an undeniable classic, and the influence it had on the series and RTS genre as a whole truly is difficult to understate. It is the progenitor of everything else on this list. For its time, CNC was an excellent game, with its innovations in gameplay and presentation causing it to become one of the most respected RTSs of the period, and while its quality hasn't deteriorated over the years, it's certainly been surpassed by its successors, leaving it as somewhat of a relic of times past. It holds up better than you would likely expect, but any 25-year-old game is going to show its age when put up alongside the new blood, and Command & Conquer is no different. As an expansion, Tiberian Sun Firestorm did so much more than its CNC1 and Red Alert counterparts. Instead of disparate missions and maps, Firestorm brought 2 whole new campaigns to Tiberian Sun for Nod and GDI, as well as a 3rd faction for skirmish and multiplayer, plus the expected new units and maps. Firestorm had a lot to offer, likely because a decent number of its features were initially meant to ship with Tiberian Sun, but thanks to delays and development issues were pushed back for the expansion. Regardless, Firestorm was a somewhat predictable, yet well executed expansion to Tiberian Sun, and would also mark the beginning of a content drought for the Tiberium saga that wouldn't end for nearly a decade with the 2007 release of Command & Conquer 3. I'm sure not everyone agrees, but personally I think Red Alert is a better game than the original Command & Conquer. While it suffers from the same inherent disadvantages of being over 25 years old at this point, Red Alert feels less jarring to play nowadays, and has a livelier presentation style. Graphically, it just has a little more going on too. Special effects are more prominent and higher quality, and on a personal note, I think I just liked the game's vibe better than the original CNC. For a lot of it though, they are interchangeable, and by now either one isn't going to be much easier to experience than the other. So take your pick. Obviously, Command & Conquer Remastered is a bit of an outlier here, being a release of games already on this list, those being Command & Conquer, Red Alert, and their associated expansions. However, it is its own product, so I'm including it. And I'm including it pretty high at that. I think the team at Petroglyph did an excellent job, and brought 2 25-year-old games into the modern day basically as good as anyone could have hoped for, with a bunch of welcome extras at that. Of course, they still play like they used to for the most part, but the improved compatibility, graphical upgrades, and quality of life improvements make for a pretty darn good game, or at the very least, an interesting history lesson and nostalgia trip on mid-90s RTSs. Here's hoping this trend includes for a few more games on this list, huh? Zero Hour was a great expansion. It's not the highest rated expansion on this list, but almost. Zero Hour brought a lot of things to Command & Conquer Generals, most notable of which being the new campaigns for all 3 factions, which returned to the series' traditional full-motion video cutscenes after their absence from the base game. It also brought along the Generals Challenge mode and added a handful of the titular characters to all of the factions. Generals the game had already become a fan favourite by the time Zero Hour hit shelves, so it's no surprise that its success helped to secure the game at the top spot for a lot of the Command & Conquer fanbase. The oddball, the black sheep, Command & Conquer Renegade comes in just past the halfway mark. The only mainline CNC game not to be a real-time strategy, Renegade brought a fresh perspective to the series as a first-person shooter, putting you in the shoes of a GDI commando in the First Tiberian War. It wasn't a genre-defining FPS, but Renegade brought enough to the table with its massive single-player levels, intense multiplayer action, and huge variety of guns and vehicles to leave a lasting impression on players for years to come. So much so that fans would recreate its multiplayer in the form of Renegade X, all of which I'll be covering soon in my in-depth retrospective on Renegade, which I'm working on as we speak. All told, Westwood took quite a risk in making a shooter out of everyone's favourite RTS franchise, and while it's not the best Command & Conquer game ever made, it's miles away from being the worst. Right, getting into the really good stuff now. Red Alert 3 was a pretty great RTS, and an excellent Red Alert game at that. It built upon the inherent silliness of its predecessors and proved to be a game that delivered both an entertaining story and setting, and significant, exciting gameplay improvements that made it feel totally unique to its predecessors. even to Command & Conquer 3, which had just been released a year prior. Red Alert 3 also holds the distinction of being the last full CNC release before Command & Conquer 4, and also being one of the platforms of choice for some impressive modern day mod projects, such as General's Evolution. My favourite thing about RA3 was its diversity. All the factions operated differently and had become even more different since their incarnations in Red Alert 2. Each had different ways to build, train and research, and helped to make the game seem like more of an actual advancement in the series than perhaps it was in reality. Alright, settle down. I know there's a lot of you who are going to be upset I didn't put Generals higher, but that's bias talking and you know it. Besides, my list, my rules. Generals is a fantastic game, especially for its time. I won't deny it. And like Renegade before it, it was a bit of an outlier in the Command & Conquer series as a whole, but it was a fan favourite from the moment it came onto the scene. And you can tell how that's persisted by seeing how well any video I do covering Generals tends to explode views-wise. Generals is also an important piece of Command & Conquer history, as it was the first 3D RTS in the series, with its pioneering use of the strategy action game engine laying the groundwork for future releases. And while being an early 2000s 3D RTS has certainly dated it graphically, for most of you that won't matter. Gameplay wise it holds up excellently, and combined with its dated but somewhat charming visuals, Generals becomes a wonderful nostalgia trip to a golden era of RTS long since past. An expansion would have to be pretty incredible to be ranked higher than the game it builds upon, and although Kane's Wrath isn't quite at that level, it's darn close. Bringing a new campaign focusing on the titular villain, brand new sub-factions for the Skrin, Nod and GDI, plus a ton of exciting new and returning units to the series, Kane's Wrath had nearly everything anyone could want in an expansion for Command & Conquer 3. Except a 60 FPS frame rate, I guess. In hindsight, it's even more important. Ask any CNC fan and they'll almost certainly tell you that Kane's Wrath was the last true game in the Tiberium saga. Command & Conquer 4 be damned. Tiberian Sun, man what a game. This might be a controversial placement, but I really love it. I'll freely admit it's likely down to personal bias to an extent. This was the first Command & Conquer game I ever played, and I have so many great memories playing it late at night in a dimly lit room on an old CRT monitor as a kid. Nostalgia aside though, Tiberian Sun was still a fantastic game. A direct sequel to the original Command & Conquer, Tiberian Sun brought a dark and moody atmosphere to the story, helped along with the fantastic soundtrack by Frank Klepacki. And while at launch it did have some issues and a decent chunk of planned content was pushed to its eventual expansion, looking back at it now, Tiberian Sun is a landmark in the series, and it's one I personally hope will be next up for a remaster. One of the greatest RTS expansions of all time, Yuri's Revenge is a truly beloved piece of Command & Conquer. Bringing 2 new campaigns, a ton of new units, and a third faction for skirmish and multiplayer, it certainly didn't skip in the content department. And story-wise it built on the already excellent framework of Red Alert 2 to develop its titular character into an extremely entertaining, larger-than-life, cartoonish villain, a tone people have always loved from Red Alert. Of course, I would be remiss not to mention the impact Yuri's Revenge also had on the modding community, with it being the platform of choice for community projects such as Mental Omega, which is still fervently played by a small but dedicated community to this day. Yuri's Revenge, however, would be nothing without its progenitor, Red Alert 2. Perhaps the biggest single development leap of any game in the series, Red Alert 2 built upon its 4-year-old predecessor in a multitude of ways. Higher production values, much improved graphics, massive faction variety, hugely improved storytelling and narratives, Red Alert 2 really did have it all. And you can see why it has become one of, if not the most beloved games in the entire series. Everything just came together so well. The characters, story, gameplay, soundtrack, the soundtrack, to make something truly special. And even going back now, Red Alert 2 is a blast to play, and much more enjoyable than you might think an over 20-year-old game might be. While it was improved with Yuri's Revenge, and mods have kept it much more alive than it otherwise would be, they all stand on the shoulders of what came before them. And now, the best Command & Conquer game, according to me, Command & Conquer 3 Tiberium Wars. I'm sure there are many of you who oppose this, but regardless, I'm sure most of us can agree that CNC3 is a fantastic entry in the series, one of the best. It was the first new numbered entry after the series was taken over from Westwood to EA Los Angeles, and they truly knocked it out of the park. Picking up where Tiberian Sun left off, Tiberian Wars brought sweeping gameplay improvements, a gorgeous graphical engine that had proven itself in the Battle for Middle-earth series, and a ton of content to boot. Not the least of which was the campaigns, which introduced a new enemy faction in the Skrin, saw the return of Joe Kukin as Kane, and continued to show the ongoing fight between Nod and GDI. Now with higher production values and more well-known actresses and actors than ever before. Gameplay wasn't forgotten about either, and with the addition of the Skrin, as well as a laundry list of new features and units, Tiberian Wars might be the best fun you can have in any CNC game today. You can quote me on that. Command & Conquer 3 was a stellar entry in the series, which perhaps in hindsight has been improved by the abysmal quality of its sequel. But regardless of that, it's number one on my list. All on its own merits. Okay, and that's that. I hope you guys enjoyed the video and this trip through the Command & Conquer series. I'd love to hear what your guys' favourites are, so leave them down below in the comments if you can decide on them. Now, I'd like to give a massive thank you for those who are supporting me via YouTube memberships and Patreon. If you like what I do here, you can support me directly via those avenues. A benefit is getting your questions answered directly at the end here, so let's do that now. Stand by for Systems Nominal asks, Zade my dude, you a catto person or a doggo person, or both? Absolutely a cat person. I've had cats for most of my life, and dogs are just too much work. Cats are great, they just do their own thing and coexist peacefully. Love it. So thanks very much for watching, like and subscribe, all that good stuff. Leave a comment for the algorithm, which I do read by the way, every single one of them, and chances are I'll reply to, so don't worry, I do see you out there. And follow me on Twitter if you're looking for updates on the channel and future videos. So thanks very much, and I will see you all next time.